I spent the last decade studying how psychology and strategy relate to business, power dynamics, relationships, and just life in general. And when I first downloaded the Chess app, I somehow recognized everything I'd learned perfectly reflected in those tiny little squares. Something just clicked that I still can't fully explain yet, but every principle that I'd learned in life was already on the board somehow. I'm still figuring out what that means and how to apply it and how to use life to get better at chess. And that's what this channel, at least the long form side of it, is all about. It's more like the philosophy aspect of chess and how you can use it to improve your life and things like that. But I'm reading the book How Life Imitates Chess by Gary Kasparov, and I wanted to share some of the things that I learned. So I'm going to probably do that over the course of a couple videos. I think today is just going to be the first two sections, but this is super important because everyone's looking for the secret habit, the trick, the shortcut that you can use to get ahead in life and also, just in the game. But in a broader sense, people want to know, like, how do I become rich and famous today? How do I get the stuff like immediately? How do I skip all the hard work and the years of toil and torment and suffering, right? Of course, everybody wants to be at that point. And so you see a lot of people that look for, millionaire morning routines or like the secret hacks and tricks that you can use to, just have your big break overnight. But chess teaches us a very valuable insight. And the insight is that there is no trick at the end of the day. There's only the quality of your decisions and your strategy. And that's what the main part of that's mostly what the first part of this book focuses on. He talks about what chess actually is. So he defines it as a synthesis of logic and creativity. And that's also something coincidentally that I try to reflect with the branding colors that I use, the color psychology that I use in my design, the black base with an orange and blue accents. It kind of shows, at least to me, that like there's a side of this cool, logical, tempered, thoughtful side, but then also there's the power, the ambition, the energy, and it's tempered and they're mixed, so it's like neither one of them is out of control, and it's kind of brought together by the black, which is more of like a contemplative sort of grounding aspect, and that you need to have an overall awareness of what you're doing and why you're doing it, which is the essence of strategy, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And that sort of blends, why am I using logic and when is it good to apply that versus when is it good to break out of the restrictions that come from that. And it's not necessarily that logic is restrictive, but it's that the limits of our logic are. So we're going to talk about this book. We're going to talk about how we're going to look at some moves on this game and how that relates directly to life and how you can use your real lived experience to get better at chess. But more importantly, how can you use chess to understand life better so that you can be more effective as a human being and function in the world as efficiently as you can, basically. When you're thinking about the mixture of logic and creativity, you have to have a combination of the two. If you just try to be creative and think of something new all the time, one is you don't necessarily understand why creative things work and why they don't. And so a good example of this is artists who try to be weird just for the sake of being different. And you see that with social media a lot too, with marketing, where they just do like these cringy things that are obviously just trying to get attention. And like, that's what everybody's trying to do on social media. But it's much better to learn the psychology of like, why do people feel attracted to certain presentations? Why do certain things sink in better than others? And then how can I solve their problems? How can I find creative ways to bring the value that I have, like the real stuff that comes from hard work and from experience? How can I present that to people in a unique way, in a way that's interesting to them? And even if you're not in that space, whatever it is that you're trying to do, if you're a computer programmer, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is, you need to learn how to, one, solve problems, but also to not just think through things in one particular way, because it's always going to be a combination of the two. And so he calls it a versatile model for decision making because the consequences are immediate and visible. And so a lot of times we go through life with bad strategies and with the wrong approach, and we just don't recognize that what we're doing is ineffective because the results can take years to show up sometimes. And it may not always be years, but for example, Jordan Peterson talks about how when you lie, a lot of times you don't get caught right away. And so you tell more lies and that becomes your habit. And over time, you just built up this huge, structure that your life is built upon, and it's founded upon dishonesty. And by the time that starts to collapse, it's not just one thing. It's not just that one conversation that you have. It's a lot of things. And if you had just been immediately corrected severely, you may have just not done that again, right? And the way I look at it, and the way that I've always taught people when I do coaching, is that it's much easier to magnify something that exists than there is to just implement it in the first place. So for example, if you are struggling with food, and I'll use the example of shopping and buying candy or cookies or something, because I kind of struggle with that a little bit. It's so much easier for me to just not buy it the one time, because as soon as I do it, it tells my brain that I'm the kind of person that buys cookies, or that I get this junk food, right? So the next time I'm in the store, it's much more likely, there's a lot more pressure that I'm going to just give in and do that again. And then once it happens a couple times, then it's a habit. Once it's a habit, it's so much easier to go from I just get a small piece of candy every now and again to I get 2 pieces of candy to I get 5 pieces of candy. Like, it escalates much quicker. So something that chess does very well is it shows you how you make decisions. Because if I'm playing a game, and we'll use this one as an example because it's up, and I really hate that it gave my opponent that brilliant move. That's super annoying. But basically I have a decision to make here. How do I proceed? How do I move forward? And when it happened a couple moves ago, is that I was trying to pull off this tactic that I use a lot in this position, where you basically you push these pawns up. If he moves the bishop, or usually they take with this pawn right here, and then a trade, he pauses, realizes he can't take the pawn with the bishop because the knight's guarding it. So he moves the bishop away so it doesn't get captured. And then the pawn pushes up and attacks this knight. Now I have control of the center, and sometimes you get a piece out of it. However, you may notice that there is a bishop pinning the knight in this case. So that tactic doesn't work. And I was just locked into, like, this is what I do. This is how I blow out the center. This is how I gain the initiative. And so I recognized it. I realized that, hey, something could happen. But I was sitting here and I'm like, what do I do? How do I figure this out? And I believe my exact words were, fuck it, let's give it a shot and just see what happens. And that's not necessarily like a bad thing, because I tried to calculate it and I just couldn't. I'm not good enough yet. And so I went ahead and I just pushed. Takes. Now what? He got a brilliant move, irritates the crap out of me. But I got to figure out how to proceed at this point because the tactic didn't work. And so looking back at this game, I just got frustrated. I was like, maybe I can still pull it off somehow. Lose a knight there. Realized that I couldn't take the bishop because of the knight here. I blundered. And basically, I ended up with a losing position. Now, I did eventually recover. I think I won this game. But the point is that when I'm looking back at it, it seems stupid. Like, why did I do that? But in the heat of the moment, it made sense, right? And so I can look back at this game and analyze myself, analyze how I make decisions, and especially under pressure. And I realized that I got tunnel vision and I wasn't thinking about the big picture. The reason that I made that decision is that I lost sight of the overall plan. I lost sight of the strategy, because if I had remembered that, look, it's not really about winning the piece here. Yes, I want central dominance, but I can't really do that with what I have. I need to develop more pieces, or I need to maneuver around before I try and initiate this attack. And of course, launching an attack from an unsecure position, a shaky foundation, is never really a good idea. It's basically gambling. Maybe they'll make a mistake and something will happen, but if they're paying attention, they probably won't. There's a lot of things I could have done here. I could have, there's a lot of things I could have done. But anyway, the point of this is that analysis is focused. You have to confine the limits of your imagination and also your intellect to the board. Now, that doesn't mean you don't consider yourself, your own psychology, and the people that they're the person that's sitting across from you, or in this case, who knows where. I think they're down in Argentina, which is pretty cool. I love playing people from around the world. But in daily life, it's easy to get caught up in the noise and the clamor and the emotions and the context, all this other complicated stuff. But I can look at this game and I can extrapolate that out into my life and say, okay, well, how did I handle the argument that I had the other day? How did I handle the negotiation? How did I close this sale? Or how did I respond to my girlfriend? How did I talk to my parents when they reached out? There's an infinite number of situations that I'm dealing with that I use tactics to get through, right? And it's easy to say, well, I made the right choice. But at the end of the day, the truth is, the reality is that most people are very tactical minded. They're thinking about the immediate problems of the battlefield, like what's right in front of them. So if somebody confronts them with an argument and accuses them of something, their response is usually to just lash back out and defend themselves, maybe even go on the offensive, right? And obviously you can see how that would apply to chess as well. There are certain players, if you make any threat, they're always going to counterattack, right? And that's a good strategy. However, you got to think about the big picture too. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every battle is worth winning. It's a cliche, but you don't want to lose the battles at the expense, or win the battles at the expense of the war. You want to keep in mind the big picture. And so to do that, sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces. You have to even sacrifice position or initiative or tempo, whatever it is. And so the cool thing about this is that, we'll get into the principles here in a second, but the principles in chess perfectly mirror the principles in life, because it's strategy at its essence. At the end of the day, it's about like, how do I move through the world effectively? So if I'm trying to get a pay raise and I'm competing with a coworker for a promotion, or if I'm out knocking doors trying to sell whatever, if I'm trying to start a business and I'm trying to get clients in and I'm trying to hire somebody, whatever it is, all these things would require immediate solutions to tangible problems. But at the same time, it's so easy to get lost in the weeds, just solving those problems, putting out fires, things get chaotic and you lose sight of where you're moving, and people just start to drift. And that's a very natural human tendency. We all fall into that. And it's just easier to see that on the board, because guess what? The strategies that we apply to life, if we're super aggressive in life, how are we going to play chess? We're probably going to be kind of similar. And a good example for me is that I play so much better when I focus on the positional aspect, when I try to just secure my position, focus on the fundamental principles, develop my pieces, make sure that I'm not leaving anything hanging, make sure that every move forward makes sense, and I'm controlling the center and things like that. When I get caught up in trying to attack, that's when I make blunders, because I get tunnel vision. I think, okay, I'm going to do this, and I make that decision before the opponent even responds. And so when they do make a move, either one, I just rush and I just immediately, respond, and it's usually the wrong move, or two, I just don't think about it clearly. And I see that a lot in sales, for example. Like, somebody will be trying to close a deal and the person's giving them an objection, and they're just trying to answer it based off of like the logical answer, and they don't understand that actually this person is using that objection as a tactic. It's a smokescreen. It's something that's not real. They're saying they need to think about it, or they're saying that they need to wait for this amount of time because there's something else going on. Maybe they don't really buy into the product. Maybe they don't trust you. Maybe they just don't feel comfortable, right? They just get the bad feeling from you. And the reality is that people buy off of emotion and then justify with logic later. And so if they feel negatively about you, then yeah, they're not going to buy your product, even if you have the most logical solution in the world. And so you have to get out of this immediate tactical battle where you're just trying to win that ground. You're trying to take that material. You have to say, okay, well, I don't want to get caught up trying to, quote, capture this bishop, when in reality I'm allowing them to develop a attack on the king side, and I'm trying to win this piece, but they're actually gaining ground, and they're doing that through psychological means. So for example, somebody, the real objection is that they just don't like how they feel about you, and you're trying to answer the logical solution. So you need to turn your attention to that human psychology, right? And the same thing as how you get tunnel visioned on the board, you can get tunnel visioned in any aspect of everyday life. For example, if my girlfriend brings an issue to me and I just want to win the argument, right? Well, is that the ultimate strategy, to win every argument? Or is the ultimate strategy, is the end goal for this game, quote unquote, for us to have a healthy, productive relationship where we both feel healthy and loved and cared for and appreciated and valued and heard? Well, obviously it's the other one, but I have a tactical mind and I tend to react to things. So if something comes up, my instinct is just to tell her why she's wrong, and maybe she's not, right? But you get the point. When in reality, it may be worth sacrificing that small battle. It may not be, but it also could be. And at the very least, it's probably not about just winning for the sake of winning. It's probably about us both having the conversation and the growth that is produced from that. Not necessarily the outcome so much as what kind of people we become in the process of working through those problems together. So tactics are immediate, like I've already said. It's what do I do right now? Strategy is going to be the long-term game. That's like where you want to be in 10 moves. So instead of focusing on like, oh, I can take a rook here, great. If there's no downside to it, if it's a free rook, then yeah, snatch it up. But if you're neglecting the development of your major pieces to do so, and the enemy's like closing in on you, it might not be a good idea. I had that problem a lot when I first started with playing black because I used the King's Indian defense. And that's great if you're like a super aggressive player, but I'm just not. I like to build up that super strong base and then just kind of inch forward. And then when I do see an opportunity, I'll jump on it. But I just don't play well in like a super chaotic environment. I actually prefer the complex locked positions that you have to like really think about. That's where I do better. And so I was trying to play this with this approach that just wasn't working for me. And the thing is that in life in general, nobody, at least for me, ever sat down and told me, here's how you handle your everyday life, just as a rule of thumb. But the way that you teach chess principles, like, hey, develop your pieces, control the center, prioritize piece activity, stuff like that, they don't really hand you that same blueprint for the rest of your life. But the thing is that the strategies that you learn from playing this game do translate into the rest of your life. And so you can become a better salesman by becoming better at chess. You can be more effective in your communication and in your relationships by being better at chess. And likewise, I didn't start really playing seriously until this year, and I just turned 30. But I picked it up super fast, and the reason I got obsessed with it is because I had been studying psychology and strategy and business and things like that for the last 10, 15 years or so, give or take. And so I recognized that like all these lessons that I had fought so hard to learn, I recognized them in the game. I was like, this is super interesting. It's just like a perfect reflection of life, but it's simple, it's confined, and you can sit down and just sharpen your decision-making skills. And so self-reflection is going to be super important in that. You need to really lock in on like analyzing your games instead of just blowing through one after another and getting all these blunders, et cetera, et cetera. That's no bueno. You're not going to really improve that way. But when I go back and I do the game review and then I like go to like clip the like for the shorts and everything, I see things differently, and I realize like that was a stupid move. Why did I make that? And so I think about I got emotional. It's like, man, I wonder if I get emotional and get caught up and short-sighted when I'm having conversations with my boss or with my family or whatever it is. And so you start to realize that like your approach is something that can be refined. People go into life not knowing anything about strategy, not understanding how to like quote unquote go through the opening moves. And so what ends up happening is they just kind of they have like early success with something. So for example, they're they're pressured as a kid, they're in a bad situation and they lie to get out of it, or they lash out, and lashing out causes the adults in their lives like, okay, I don't want to deal with this. So they learn, hey, if I just throw a temper tantrum and I get super aggressive, people leave me alone. And then they're an adult and you're trying to like date them or work with them or whatever else, and they're just like throwing a temper tantrum all the time. And the thing is, though, that they're not recognizing that they're caught in a tactical battle without recognizing how that affects the long-term strategy. And the same is true for us as well. I mean, it's easy to point fingers at other people, but we also got to, look in the mirror and point the finger back at ourselves, because otherwise we're not going to correct our own blind spots. We're not going to fix our own shortcomings. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if we see the worst in other people if we can't also see that in ourselves and fix it. So like you can sit down and look at a game like, oh, I would have done XYZ. Well, would you have though? Because the reason that person made that mistake is not because they're necessarily bad at chess, but it could be other things. It could be like when they are under pressure, they stop analyzing things in the most logical way, and they start shifting into more of a reactive phase. So you guys get the point on that. The difference between the bridge between strategy and tactics is the why. Why am I doing this thing? If I'm having this argument because it's essential, like let's say I'm at work and I'm arguing with my boss, I'm having the argument because if this doesn't go my way, I'm leaving. Okay, that's a very different situation from this gets on my nerves and it kind of makes me feel unappreciated and I want to talk about it. But it's really easy for those conversations to kind of spiral out of control and you get locked into something super negative. And if you start to address that situation that's not that serious very aggressively, and emotions get heated, it can get away from you very quickly. And what ends up happening is that you've weakened your position because now they think that you're a douchebag. They think that you're annoying. They're mad at you, right? And that person has an ego. That person feels a certain way about you, and like it or not, they're going to treat you differently. And so sometimes it's worth confronting people. I'm not saying that like it's a black and white thing. I'm just pointing out that if you don't know why you're doing something, it's very difficult to figure out how to do it, because there's a lot of ways to do anything, but there's usually only a few ways that are right, and there's always a best way. So when you're playing, I sometimes get into the bad habit where I don't know what to do, so I just start attacking random pieces. I see a pawn over here, I'm gonna go snatch that up. I see a bishop over here, it's like it's not really doing anything, but I try to capture it just because I want the material, right? But to quote Rockefeller, never settle for petty victory unless you're content with a life of petty success. And I feel like a lot of people, they're so focused on the pettiness, they're so focused on like the superficial, like I want to win this argument, I want to close this deal even if it like ruins the relationship with the person. I want to win this competition even if like I go to unethical ends to do so, and I undermine my own integrity in the process. And so it's just super important to focus on like, is this worth fighting for? And also to like, is this the best way to accomplish my long-term objective? Is taking that pawn really important? Sometimes it is. Sometimes that is exactly what you have to do. And if that's the case, then, go for it. But also like, if you don't think about why you're doing things, both in the game and in your real life, then you can't look back at it as clearly and figure out what you could have done better, right? Because if I'm just making random moves and I look back at the game like that was crazy, that was stupid, it's going to be really hard to fix that. But if I'm trying to think of the principles and I'm looking at the board and I go, well, I don't know what to do, I'm going to just improve my least active piece. That's better than nothing. And then I look back and I go, oh, you know what? When I moved that piece, I didn't realize that it was supporting something else and I blundered, or whatever it is. I weakened my position, or I ignored a threat that, I really shouldn't have. But then I can look back at it and fix it because I recognize, okay, the decision making process needs to be refined a little bit. I can't just follow the principle. I have to also attach other things onto that, like making sure that I don't fall into these other traps or pitfalls or whatever. But he says, Kasparov says that without strategy, you're just reacting. You're a tactician at the mercy of whoever has a plan. And the life application that he gives would be, having an objective without a strategy is like building a house and starting with the roof. And I actually work in construction. I put roofs on all the time. So those that kind of hit home for me. If you just look at like the end result, like the house is finished, right? And you're trying to put the roof on, well, you've ignored the foundation. You've ignored the steps that you have to take in order to get there. And you're just saying, I'm going to arrive at the destination. But if you have a strategy, you recognize that, hey, it's not just about the roof. It's about the house as a whole. It's about the entire structure. It's about like the home that it creates. And so it's a very different approach than just trying to bring about some desired end. And so you can look at that as money. You can look at that in your career. I just want to be super rich. Okay, well, how do you get there? Well, I guess I'll have to find the highest, stream of revenue. Okay, but if you don't think about what all that entails, you're likely to fall into something that's unethical or unproductive. I've known people who were super successful and they built these companies based off of lying, cheating, and stealing from people, and they have a ton of money. But I do not envy them at all. And it's not because I'm like trying to cope with it. Like, I am a little bit jealous. I'm not going to lie. Like, obviously I want that lifestyle, but I don't want what comes with it in that way. They have no peace. They're never at rest. Everybody hates them. The only way that they can keep people around them is through manipulation. Like, I don't want to live like that. They're constantly running from the consequences of their actions. And if you instead do things the right way, quote unquote, and you build things at least to the best of your ability with integrity and intention, then you can build something that is very stable and that other people will come to support you. And so now you have a real foundation, you have a real team around you, you have people that believe in you and that want you to succeed. That's very different from just like fighting with the world and being at war with everybody you come in contact with. It's much more stable, it's much more long term. But so for the tactics and strategy aspect, I'll just close by saying ask why before every move. That will take you so much further than the average person, because people just don't think about things. They think that they do, they believe that they do, but in reality they don't have a logical process for coming to a decision. I'll give this one more example and then we'll wrap up. At one point in my life, I had to make a decision between whether I was going to take a job offer or not. It was a good job, it would be a good career, it's going to be a lot of money, it would be a step down at first, but within 6 months to a year I'd be making significantly more than I was at my current job. And then in 2 or 3 years down the road, potentially, we should be in the 6-figure range. But then 5 years, like the reps that they had in that position were making about $300,000 a year. So it was a good job. However, I was also trying to start my own business. And I knew that I was going to get a lot of education in this job. There's going to be some more money, but there's also going to be the drawback of time. I wasn't going to have the time to work on my own business. It was going to be a longer commute. It was going to be a ton of energy and work that I wasn't going to be able to apply to something I was building. But also what I was building was risky and I wasn't sure if it would work out. And I had to decide, like, do I bet on myself or not? Do I do the hard, risky thing or not? And so I couldn't just figure out, like, what do I want to do? Because I wanted to do both things. And I also didn't want to do either, if I'm being totally honest. And so I had to figure out, like, a process for deciding what was important. And I had to figure out how to cut through the emotional noise. Some of that would be fear, for example. I was like, okay, I can't make the decision to take this job because I'm scared my business will fail. That's just not good enough. I need to cut out the emotion. Doesn't mean that I won't fail. Doesn't mean that I have to believe in myself and go down this road, but fear cannot be the reason that I do it. So, okay, cool. Cut that out, prune that off. And then you just kind of start going through the list of, like, what is actually important to me at the end of the year, at the end of the day. What at the end of this 5-year period would be better that I fail at something that I tried to do and then I put my heart and soul into and did my best at and learned a lot from? Or would it be just in this other industry working for somebody else, making them rich? And I eventually decided to reject the offer and pursue my own thing. Guess what? Didn't work out. However, I learned so much. And I also have now gained some experience in overcoming fear, in putting myself out there in the marketplace and seeing what happens and just adjusting to problems as they arise and learning how to solve them and how to figure them out. And that decision making quality was super important. It was very foundational to my character development. And so you can apply that to your games, and the games are the perfect way to practice it because it's focused, it's immediate, and you can just lock in on specific moves that you made and analyze why you made them, and you can get better much quicker than anybody else. So I appreciate you guys listening. Good luck.